Thank you, Madam Justice Moderator, and thanks for setting the template like you have set. But I'm a little apprehensive because if you have ended what you had to your opening remarks with saying that the nation wants to know, I'm a little hesitant to actually participate in this debate. But nevertheless, since you opened up, first of all, thank you very much, the Hindu and the Sastra University, for giving this opportunity to share some ideas with all of you, with a very distinguished audience here and my distinguished co-panelists. Yes, last year I was supposed to be here, but hearing the justice today, I'm happy I was not here last year because there was no woman on the stage, she said. So I don't feel guilty for that. So I'm here now. But I think, ma'am, you are absolutely right in saying that what is this idea of India? Every one of us will have our own idea of India. True, in these days of Bharat Mata Ki Jai, of course, we'll have when Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's Jai Hind as our idea. We'll have Bhagat Singh's Inqilab Zindabad also as our idea. All these are ideas. And remember, all the wars that India won, independent India, were won under one major slogan. There were many other slogans. The shout of saying Sat Sri Akal, Bolo Sonihal, Sat Sri Akal, was the slogan, the war cry of all our soldiers who wear the pagdis of the Punjabis. That's as patriotic. In fact, more, they won wars for us, defended India. So in these days, yes, everybody will have an idea. But when we talk about an idea of India, we are talking, I think, about a legal constitutional manner in which we define the country which all of us love, all of us are part of, as India. Now, what is this idea of India? Now, I think this has a lot to do, and let me, go beyond the template of what has been said, that to try and understand how this huge country, with all the diversities all of us know, with everything, there's no other country comparable. How did it come together into forming a concept of India and evoking the best of qualities in human beings in the name of India and Indian unity? Now, this, I think, has a lot to do with our struggle for independence from the British. And like many eminent sociologists have pointed out, political scientists, the prodigious and sustained mobilization of our people that we witnessed during our struggle for freedom, particularly in the last 3 crucial decades of the struggle for independence, could not have been possible without an alternative and inclusionary ideal of an independent India. Now, what would this independent India be, which I still think is that India that I was born into? And that is that it was a concept that rejected the entire trajectory of the nation state and nationalism as it appeared in Europe when civilization was moving from your feudal monarchies towards capitalism. The Westphalian Treaty, or the peace agreement in the mid-17th century, that laid down the notions of sovereignty, of nationalism, and the nation state. And all your international laws today are based on the treaties of Westphalia. All the laws that are there in the United Nations today are all based on those treaties. Now, what was that concept, and why do you say that India moved beyond that concept of modern lexicography of what is called a nation? That what emerged in the Westphalian Agreement was a compulsion to seek legitimacy for a new kind of a state, one that could no longer appeal to older notions of divine right of states, personified in their monarchs. It sought this legitimacy in a new form of political psychology, of a new kind of subject, the citizen, a psychology based on a feeling for a new form of entity that had emerged, and that was the nation. The feeling, which came to be called nationalism, had to be generated in the populace of citizens, and the standard process was that adopted in Europe. For generating it was to find an external enemy within the outsider, that is the other in one's midst. The Irish, the Jews, to give only two examples. I'll come to the Indian variant a little later, that these had to be despised and subjugated. In somewhat a later time, during the course of human civilizational advance, this came to be known as the minorities, and the expression of majoritarianism was considered to be an expression of nationalism. Now, India moved beyond this in terms of saying that there is no majority-minority. We are a country of equals, and that equality enshrined in our constitution went beyond the Westphalian concept of what is a nation, and went beyond many of the international jurisprudence today that governs the relations between nations. So the point that I want to make is that the idea of India is not a mere metaphysical concept. The idea of India was the product of a momentous and a very big people struggle against colonial rule, and it threw up this concept of an idea of India where it is the inclusiveness of the people that defines this idea of India. To put it in a nutshell, according to me, the drawing of the exploited majority of India, the drawing in of the numerous linguistic nationalities, the drawing in of the multi-religious Indian population, above all, the drawing in of all Indians in an inclusive path of economic and social justice. This constitutes the idea of India. Now, it is on this basis that we'll have to move to see what could be the ideal India to which we want to move. Now, any concept that goes back to the Westphalian concept of majoritarianism as being the core of nationalism is actually a throwback in our historical evolution and in the evolution of the thought process of modern India. And that is why today, when we talk about this sort of a throwback, majoritarianism versus minoritarianism, this sort of a throwback that we are witnessing today in various expressions that are currently happening now in our country, of intolerance, of various other campaigns that are currently happening, it's an effort to throw back the evolution of the Indian state, the evolution of the concept of India back to the Westphalian concept of majority versus the minority. And that is regressive. An ideal India has to be progressive. And a progressive ideal India can only come when we talk in terms of converting the political independence that we have into the economic independence of our people. Now that will have to be, if that has to be achieved, without which I don't think this idea of India can survive. And India as a majoritarian state can never survive. And if that has to be prevented, this transition from our political independence, what you said, madam, there will be, come when Chennai votes, people with great enthusiasm and interest come to vote. What Mr. Gurumurthy and I were whispering to each other is that, yes, the greater the participation of voters today is also the biggest stimulus package that you can offer in India is to hold an election. From the Tatas and the Ambanis to the ordinary rag picker, everybody makes their money. And in fact, some places where I go, when you go to the election campaign, when you go for campaigning, people come and tell me, he said, sir, why do we have this only once in 5 years? Why don't we have it every year? You could take that as a great expression of Indianness and of an idea of India. But then that hides the actual reality, that this is the only time when the people are heard. This is the only time when you're actually serving the people. So let's not, we have to move, I think, beyond these concepts of saying, you have quoted many of our ancient thinkers on this concept of idea of India, Bharathanatyam, Bharatavarsha. And when we learned our Shastras, at the Sastra University, I can tell you this, we learned our Shastras when we were very young. There was also, in the mantras, would come say Jambudvipe, a giant island. A giant island is the description of India in our ancient Vedic rituals that I've also learned by heart and recited before I grew up into later levels of consciousness and moved towards Marxism. and that Jambudvipe nation and the nation of today. Please, for heaven's sake, let us also temperate. Yes, filter out the wisdom, learn from it. But what is the reality that we have today in our country? 1,614 languages, registered in your census. And how do we get in terms of 6,400 castes? 6 major religions, 4 of them born in this country. 6 anthropologically defined ethnic groups. That is India today. And that India today, how do we, first of all, keep that India, and what is the idea you have for the growth of that India? And that can only happen when we transform the political independence we achieved into the economic independence of our people. There, in order to protect myself from the charge that this is the constant refrain of a communist who keeps talking like this, let me invoke Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar in his 125th birth anniversary the country is observing. I think 25th of November, that's right, 25th of November 1949, he presents the draft constitution for commending it for approval to the Constituent Assembly. And while presenting the draft, he makes a small speech, and towards the end of his speech, he makes one, I think, very pertinent point, which has a lot to do with the idea of India that we are talking of. And that is, he says, Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar, that we have created with our labor a political structure where we have given, or this constitution will give, one man, one vote. I'm sure, ma'am, when Dr. Ambedkar was talking of one man, one vote, he meant women also. In those days, please don't take offense. In those days, man, unfortunate, but it was considered to involve women as well, include women as well. But he said, we have given one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. But, he goes on, the socio-economic conditions that we have, that contradictions that are there in our society, do not permit us to move towards one man, one value. We have given one man, one vote, and one vote, one value, but we have not given one man, one value. Until this contradiction is not erased, the entire political structure that we have so laboriously built will be thrown asunder by this growing socio-economic inequalities. What is nationalism today? Is it merely shouting Bharat Mata ki Jai? Nationalism for me would mean to move from that one man, one vote, one value, to one man, one value. That is true nationalism. Now, if you are not able to invoke that nationalism, what is this idea of India? And like you correctly said, you will have different ideas. The people with the luxury cars and SUVs will want good highways. The pedestrians would want good pedestrian walkways. Now, that is why you will have different ideas for different people, unless you have that equality. So, therefore, this conversion, and please recollect, the best of Indian minds, the best of Indian people who have sacrificed for the freedom of this country and who have inspired generations, continue to inspire even today. Bhagat Singh is one human being who can never get old. I mean, he's also a constant source of inspiration for generations all across the country. I don't know in this part of the of India, but all across. But what were all of them talking about? Conversion of the political independence into economic independence of our people. Now, this is what would be an ideal India that we'll have to move towards. That is, at the political level, any effort to try and throw back this concept of an idea of India into the Westphalian concept of majoritarianism versus minoritarianism, that is going to be a throwback that will rupture the entire concept of India, its unity and its progress. That is something that cannot be permitted. So at the political level, the idea is towards inclusion. And that inclusion will have to be both economic and social. And we seriously have to consider various other measures that will have to come in terms of the times for the realization of this social inclusion. At the economic level, this idea of India can only be concentrated not merely by lip service of converting political independence into economic independence, but at the economic self-reliant, self-sufficient economic foundations for this country of ours. If that is not strengthened, but instead you have policies of bartering away that as a part of your entire global phenomenon that is taking place, that will run against the grain of the ideal India that we are seeking. And at the social level, the question of social justice, the question of inequalities, caste inequalities, social inequalities, the faster we address them, only then we'll be able to unitedly move towards that ideal India. So therefore, in conclusion, what I'd like to state is, have you taken time or do you have? Huh? Okay. So therefore, the point, to summarize what I've been saying so far, is that the idea of India as a concept itself was a contribution that India has made to political thought and political philosophy globally at the time of our independence, when we moved beyond the current Westphalian concepts of nationhood and sovereignty. We coalesced together a nation which many, including Winston Churchill, said that it cannot be a country for very long. There were many doomsday predictions that this country cannot remain together. But it all came together on the basis of that psychological makeup. Yes, we have our diversities, we'll all be together, and that idea of India we thrown up was a unique contribution to the process of world political thought. Now, that idea of India was based on the premise of what we have enshrined in our Constitution that Madam Justice has encapsulated very well, and those concepts of equality, fraternity, and liberty. That is what ties us together. And that's constitutional order. If that is disrupted, then this idea of India doesn't remain. That's why any movement that goes back to that majoritarianism and minoritarianism has to be defeated. Otherwise, this idea of India will not survive. And if that has to survive and strengthen, we have to move towards consolidating our political independence through the economic independence of our people. If that has to be done, we have to achieve at the political level, at the economic level, and at the social level. We have to achieve that equality that we promised in the Constitution, that fraternity between our peoples, irrespective of the creed that we promised in our Constitution, and that social justice that we have promised in our Constitution. Ideal India would be when we are able to achieve this. Now finally, if you'll give me 2 minutes, I'll just take, you see, what we are seeing today in India is actually a battle of visions. That was thrown up again during the freedom struggle. To put it in a nutshell, one vision was that of the Congress, which led the freedom struggle at that point of time, which talked in terms of the future of India. The character of independent India would be a secular democratic republic. You had the left, the stream that I represent, which said a secular democratic republic in itself is not it's a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition, as economists would call. Because unless you move towards economic independence of all our people, that is towards a socialistic order, this political independence itself cannot be sustained. As opposed to these two, was the third expression, which had a twin expression, was the third vision. And this third vision had twin expression that the character of India will be defined by the religious affiliation of its peoples. Thus emerged the concept of Hindu Rashtra and the concept of Islamic State. The partition, unfortunately, settled that Islamic State business with the formation of Pakistan. But that battle of a secular democratic republic moving towards an ideal India, of achieving or converting a political independence into economic independence, achieving political, social, and economic justice, that is a continuing vision. The struggles are on for that. But then this vision of converting into a majoritarianism in India, of that Hindu Rashtra, that remains, and that is the regression. So that is where we stand today. That is where, if you want to test my loyalty, I'll say Bharathanatyam ki jai. But if you want to test my passion to build an ideal India and to build an ideal idea of India, then we have to move, and the foundation has to be the parameters and the template set by the Indian Constitution. And I think that's the direction in which we'll have to move. So I thank you once again for giving me this opportunity to share some thoughts with you, and thank you for the attention.